Good morning, it's Kenny Burdine. Thought I'd do another cattle market update like I did a couple weeks ago. Just for reference, it's Monday morning, it's May 11th. I'm recording this around 9 o'clock, so Kentucky markets have just started to trade for this week. So be aware that most of what I'm talking about is actually from last week. And want to talk about some things that we saw both here locally and nationally. So first of all, I would just say that I actually think last week is going to end up being fairly significant when we think about the greater scheme of things. If you look at how much slaughter capacity or slaughter has been down for the last several weeks, since really about the second week of April, it's huge. I want you to note, though, last week estimates were that it was actually up a little bit. I don't know that increase itself explains what we saw in the futures market, but I think it definitely is indicative of the fact that the market seemed to think that maybe the worst is behind. So it was a very positive news. So the fact that slaughter was up was significant. If you look at what futures prices did, they were up for feeder cattle, for example, between $8 and $12 a hundredweight at the end of last week versus the end of the week before. So that's very significant. I think that's a major reason why. Fed cattle prices were also up. Now, be aware that what I'm showing you is slaughter steer prices, 5 weighted average. I don't have last week's numbers yet. So what you're seeing right there at the end of the blue line, that's actually week before last. It looks like for last week, we're going to be trading just a little bit above $1. So prices definitely increased. And again, I think it's largely due to that increase in slaughter capacity nationwide. Shifting gears and thinking about local prices, we'll start with calves. Black line there is a 550 pounds feeder steer. I use him as my baseline. I still maintain the biggest thing that COVID-19 did to our calf market is it took out what is usually a very nice seasonal run-up as our stocker operators lay in grass calves in April. We didn't really see that. I really do think these calves are trading for about 20 cents a pound less than they would be otherwise. One piece of good news is there's not a lot of indication that we've seen that calf market back down after those initial placements of calves in April. So maybe some of this better news the last couple of weeks has kind of prevented some of that from happening. That 550 pound steer state average basis has been in the very low 140s. It's actually been pretty steady the last 6 weeks. If you look at what value added calves have been selling for in some of those larger groups, they're up in the 150s. That's kind of where they've been. The most significant thing I can talk about last week actually was in the heavy feeder cattle markets. That light blue line, there's an 850 pound feeder steer. State average basis, he sold for over $6 a hundredweight higher than he did a week before last. So that's significant. State average basis, he was a little bit over $1.10. But if you look at what, again, the value added cattle sold for and what those larger groups of those heavy feeders sold for, a lot of those were pushing $1.20, $1.18 to $1.20. So that's a pretty big improvement. So I think our biggest mover last week is what we saw in heavy feeder cattle prices. Last series, I'll talk about our cull cow markets. Been following these closely. One, they've been moving a lot, of course. And then secondly, for most cow-calf operators, cull cow prices are somewhere in the ballpark of 20 to 25% of total revenue. So it's a big significant factor for them. They've honestly held pretty steady and steadily improved about the last 6 weeks. I'm showing you an 80 to 85% boning cow medium dress on this chart. She moved for state average around 57 cents a pound last week. If you look at what higher dressed cows brought, though, some of those were in the 60s and even some pushed into the 70s. So most of our cull cows were somewhere in the mid to upper 50s, but certainly some higher qualities well into the 60s and 70s. So this market honestly has steadily been pretty solid for us the last several weeks. Last thing I'll say, and I'm sorry I don't have much of an update here, we still don't have specific details on payment rates and enrollment procedures for the coronavirus food assistance program. I look for that literally any day. It could happen at any time. So definitely keep your eyes out for that. And then, like I mentioned 2 weeks ago, I would also encourage you to be thinking about, what have I got? What can I get my hands on that I might be asked for in terms of documentation? Secretary Perdue in his teleconference used the word demonstrate damages. So I have to assume they're going to want some sort of documentation of some type to either establish cattle inventory or cattle sales. So just think about what you've got that you might could be used if you were asked for that. And again, I think very soon we'll know some more specifics about what payment rates will be and what you might be asked to provide. Finally, my contact info, reach out to me anytime, email, phone, certainly hit me up on Twitter if you wish. Wish you the very best, and I will talk to you very soon.